David Brewster here with New Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is Music Only Has 12 Notes, and this episode is going to be my humble attempt at simplifying some commonly confusing areas of music theory, exploring the fretboard, learning the notes on the neck, building triads and seventh chords and basic scales and stuff like that, and really get your hands dirty, thinking about notes and music and where it is on the guitar. And that word thinking is an important word here because I'm going to basically force you to think. And I know a lot of players out there don't like thinking when they're playing guitar. They just like running patterns and shapes and pentatonic boxes and power chords without really thinking about what they're doing, physically or technically. And this episode and this lesson is definitely going to force you to think about what you're playing, where it's located, some different ways of looking at it, on the neck, and really, diving in. So if this is an area that you're kind of confused about or you'd like to learn more about, or maybe you want a refresher, this lesson's totally for you. So to get started here and basically identify the 12 notes of music, we're basically talking about the chromatic scale or the 12-tone scale. And we've talked about this in other episodes on my channel. And this is very important. So there's, a lot of different ways you can view this. We can basically do it kind of arranged, centered around one position like this. There's your chromatic scale right there. That's an A chromatic right there, one octave, and that's A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and A. Right? So that's kind of centered around one position like that, and that's good. But the main thing that, playing scales like this, across the strings, it kind of hides like the intervallic spacing and what's actually going on as you move string to string. I remember I had trouble with that when I was younger. A lot of my students I've worked with, had trouble with that. So let's arrange this on one string. So instead of doing it like this, let's do it like this. And that's just solely on the A string right there. The exact same scale, but played like this. So that's everything in the kitchen sink from A to A, right? Every half step. So from the open string to the 12th fret, that's kind of your finish line right there. And then everything from the 12th fret higher repeats. So once you learn this down here, then you can transfer all this information to the higher, position up here. So right there, there's your first kind of exercise, is learning a chromatic like this. And one reason why I like working on things like this with my students or even with myself is it's very streamlined. That gives you a bird's eye view of all the notes and the spaces between those notes. It's very similar to a piano, the way the notes of a piano are laid out. So here's an image comparing the layout of a piano, just a section of the keyboard, and then also a section of the guitar neck. So check this out. Next up, we're going to basically start finding triads. So instead of worrying about 12 notes, like we just did with the chromatic scale, with triads, we only have 3 notes we have to worry about. So we're going to slowly start building our way up. And, we're going to start with A minor first, and an A minor triad has the notes A, C, and E, which spells ace, which makes Ace back there on the mystery machine very happy. And we could play that right here. A, C, E, and then I hit the octave of that A. You could also do it like that, or maybe down here. But those 3 versions of that, arpeggio, they still kind of camouflage or hide what's actually going on. Because you can find those notes, but then when you arrange it on a single string like we did with the chromatic scale, you can actually see what's going on. So right there, there's A, C, E, A. And you can do the exact same thing lined up on the A string. Like that. There's your open A, C, E, and that octave of the root A. It's like the intro to Hot for Teacher right there. So that's an A minor triad. Now we can convert that to major. All we have to do is raise the third. So that C is going to move up to a C sharp. Right? Everything else is the same. So there's A major, A, C sharp, and E. You could do it like that. You could do it down here. However you want to do it. But then you could basically basically do the same thing on that single string instead of this, like we had for A minor. Then just move that C sharp up a fret, keep everything else the same, and voila, there's an A major triad on the A string. You know, something like that. We just uncovered minor and major triads, so let's split music into those two worlds, you know, the minor tonality world and the major tonality world. And there are other tonalities used in heard of music, you know, diminished and augmented and some other kind of freak tonalities, but for most, you know, popular forms of music and most common, you know, songs and music that you hear, it's, you know, usually major or minor, kind of floating back and forth, happy or sad. And for this, you know, we just uncovered that minor triad, right? So what we're going to do now is find minor seventh, you know, seventh chords. So we're going to basically target, you know, the same thing, but we're going to add a G, the flat 7. So it's still A minor, but we're adding that G note. Think of an A minor 7 chord, right? We're just spelling that chord out like that. Now to arrange that on a single string, we could do everything the same, but we're going to add this G note. You could do a tap slide there if you'd like the tapping approach. Like that. You could shift it. Like a big, you know, index or pinky slide. However you want to do that, but the important thing there is you're, you know, basically, you know, learning this and then really getting that bird's eye view, arranging it like that. Now once you have that minor seventh, you know, arpeggio under your belt, if you really have your thinking cap on, you know, it's very similar to a very famous scale that you probably already know how to play. Think of the minor pentatonic box, right? That first octave right there is very similar to what we just played with that A minor 7 arpeggio. So now we're just adding the note D right there, right? A, C, D, E, G. So now we're using 5 of the 12 notes in music. And there's your A minor pentatonic box in 1 octave. You could arrange that on the A string with the tap slide, or you could, you know, find some other ways to kind of shift through that, but there it is. Found the pentatonic scale. What about the blues scale? Now we're just going to add the flat 5. So now we're using 6 of the 12 notes in music. Right? So that E flat right there, and now we're playing the A minor blues scale. And then to arrange that on a single string, you could do it like this. And that's tricky because you're using all your fret hand fingers right there. But that's, you know, one way you could approach playing that on one string. But the important thing here is you're really thinking about what you're playing, where it is on the guitar, and most importantly, you're thinking about those notes, right? A, C, D, E flat, E, G, and A. You're not thinking 5, 8, 5, 6, 7, 5, 7. You're actually thinking those notes, A, C, D, E flat, E, G, A. Since we're visiting this minor tonality world, we could basically start running through the modes from the major scale that fit in a minor key or tonality. And we could start with Aeolian, or the natural minor scale. And we did actually attack the modes from the major scale early this year in the Scales and Tales series. So I highly recommend, you know, dive into some of those lessons. It's going to help you kind of see, you know, what we're doing here. But to get started, we're going to basically look at the natural minor or Aeolian mode. And this is really just the notes from the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's no sharps or flats. It's the relative minor of C major, all the white keys on the piano. But Aeolian we could play in 1 octave right here. And there's your A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, right? So there it is, you know, in one position across the string. So let's arrange it on one string once again so you can really see what's going on. You can do it like that without tapping, or you can tap. But there's your A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, right? kind of navigating the fretboard and locating those notes and thinking. And that's the important word, once again, is thinking about what you're doing. Now let's shift that to Dorian. And to turn Aeolian into Dorian, we only have to change one note. You know, this F natural is going to move up to an F sharp. So we have a major or a regular sixth, like this. Right? That's the ever, jazzy kind of Dorian mode. You could also play it like that, however you want to do it. But then on one string, there's your A, B, C, D, and then E, F sharp, G, A. So you're only changing that one note, that F to F sharp right there, like that. And what about Phrygian, like the really exotic? So that, compared to the natural minor scale, that has a flat 2, right, or a flat 9 right there. So once again, in review, there's Aeolian. And all we're doing is changing that B to a B flat to make it Phrygian. Alright, so that's going to be reflected in that single string version, because now we're grabbing this B flat right there. And then you're going to shift up, there's your E, F, G, and you can tap that A. Something like that. But that's really interesting to open up your fretboard and, not only find it in one position, but then also find it on a single string like that and really investigate what's going on. Or what about exploring major tonalities in the major tonality world? So we can basically, go back to that major triad we found, near the beginning of this episode, that A, C sharp, E, and then the A again. There's your A major triad, right? So we could actually think about the major pentatonic scale, right? Right here. Right, that root, second, third, fifth, the sixth now, instead of the flat 7 like we had in the minor pentatonic, but that's major pentatonic. That really has a shift in there, because we're basically playing the root, the second, the third, and make sure it's that major third, that C sharp, and then we're jumping all the way to E to F sharp, and then there's your root with that A, right? So the important thing there, once again, is we're thinking. We're noticing what we're playing here, and then really, and then from there we can start uncovering like maybe the 7th chord, in the 7th chord tonalities in the major tonality family, like A major 7 right here, right? So it's A major triad with an added G sharp, that major 7th right there. To a single string, there's your A, C sharp, E, and then that G sharp's right there. You could do a tap slide if you'd like the tapping approach. You could slide it like that if you want to kind of slide and slip and slide around. And then from major 7 to dominant 7th, all we have to do is just lower that 7th. So G sharp's going to move back to a G. And think of A7. And that's basically what we're playing with right there. And you could, rearrange that on the A string like that. So what about scales and modes in a major key, or scales and modes from the major tonality family? And we could start with Ionian, or the major scale in the key of A right here. There you can see we've got A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A to produce A Ionian. Right. So we can basically take that and arrange that on a single string. Here's your A, B, C sharp, and D, right? And then that E, F sharp, G sharp, and A. Right, you can tap it. However you want to play that. But the important thing there is you're thinking about where those notes are, how now you can rearrange them on the fretboard. And you're really getting your hands dirty thinking about this and really laying it all out like that. So now we can shift Ionian to Lydian, and that's definitely one of the major family modes. And Lydian basically just has a raised fourth. So we're going to play the same scale, but D is now going to suddenly be a D sharp for that sharp 4 or sharp 11, like this. And there's the Lydian note, that sharp 4. And we can arrange that on the A string pretty easy. There's your A, B, C sharp, and now D sharp right there. And then hang on to that fingering, and then just basically move it up here. And there's the remainder of the scale. But the important thing here is don't just rely on the fingering shape or that pattern. Think about those notes. A, B, C sharp, D sharp. And even though we're repeating that same fingering, go ahead and think about that. E, F sharp, G sharp, and A. Don't be afraid to use your brain for this. Right? So there's Lydian. What about mixed Lydian, like the flat 7 funky, tonality? That kind of flavor. And right there we could do mixed Lydian right here. That flat 7. And right there we can easily transfer that to the A string. Here's your A, B, C sharp, and D. And then right there do the exact same fingering again right there. So there's your E, F sharp, G, and there's your A. Right? Rely on the fingering, like the visual. Think about those notes. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, and A. Just make sure you don't screw up like I did right there. Alright, so up to this point we basically investigated minor and major triads. We investigated the minor tonality family, seventh chords and pentatonic scales and modes. Also the major tonality family with, triads, seventh chords, modes, and whatnot. And now I'm going to kind of help steer you away from just, minor and major tonalities. And now we're going to hit Locrian and kind of target that minor 7 flat 5 tonality. So minor 7 flat 5 in the key of A, we could arrange it, in a position across the strings like this. You could actually think back to like the blues scale. Right? Think of the blues scale, but there's no 4th and no 5th. We've got a flat 5 instead. So get rid of these two notes and keep everything else, and that's basically A minor 7 flat 5 spelled out. Right? So there's this. But then just get rid of, that D and E and keep that E flat. And there's A minor 7 flat 5. We could arrange that on a single string right here. Do it without sliding, or without tapping with sliding, like that, or you could slide and tap, however you want to play that. That's the tonality. And then that's basically flirting with Locrian, like the last mode from the major scale, and Locrian's right here. Very distinct, very ugly kind of flavor too, but that's Locrian. And we could arrange that on the A string. So there's, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, and A for A Locrian. And we could do that right here. There's your A, B flat, C, and that D note. That whole step fingering right there, but there's A, B flat, C, and D. Take that fingering, move it right there, and there's the next part. There's E flat, F, and G. But once again, make sure you're not just relying on the fingering shape. Think about those notes. E flat, F, and G. And there's your A, of course. So the important thing here, it doesn't matter if you're tapping or sliding, you could pick every note. Do something like that. If you don't want to slide or tap, you could literally turn that into a position shifting picking exercise or something. But the most important thing here is you're thinking about the notes that you're playing, whether it's a chord or an arpeggio or a scale, pentatonic, a mode, whatever. You're literally thinking about what you're doing, where it is. And I'm going to supply you with one more concept here that's going to blow this entire lesson wide open. But before I share this, last little tip, make sure you kind of have at least a general idea of what we did so far in this lesson. All right, so we basically reached the end of this episode or lesson, but there's one more thing I'm going to add here that's going to kick everything that we just did up another notch, if not 10 notches. It's going to complicate things, but after you've worked on this, your awareness and ability of, as far as identifying notes on the fretboard, not to mention scales and arpeggios, and just really kind of getting your hands dirty with these nuts and bolts of music. This is really important. So we're going to take everything that we just did, we kind of arranged in a single position across the strings and also on a single string, on the A string. We're going to basically do that, but we're going to do it everywhere on the fretboard, on every string, every position. So think of the low E. There's an A right here on the 5th fret. The octave of that A is on the 17th fret right there. Those are the only two A's that exist on the low E right there. And we could do the exact same thing, the same process, triads and pentatonic and, scales and modes and stuff. Let's find like the minor triad right there. So there's A, there's C, there's E, and there's that A again. The same thing we did on the A string. But just arranged a little differently because we're on a different string. Now, if you know the low E string, then you automatically know the high E string because they kind of mirror each other, right? There's A, there's C, there's E, and there's that A again. So if you know the low E, then you automatically know the high E, right? Now let's move over, we already did the A. Let's move over to the D string, right? There's an A there on the 7th fret on the D. There's a C right there on the 10th fret on the D. That E note there on the 14th fret on the D. And then the A octave is the 19th fret now. Right? The same thing we did here, but just, up here. Let's go to the G string now. So there's A, there's C, there's E, and there's an A octave right there. Right? And then finally on the B string right there, this is going to be interesting. So there's an A on the 10th fret, there's a C on the 13th fret, E on the 17th fret, and then your A octave is the 22nd fret. So if you have 22 frets, you have just enough to get up there like that. We already talked about the high E, but there it is again. Now imagine walking through all those different scales and modes, the pentatonic scale, Dorian and Lydian and Locrian and all that stuff, and basically mapping all of that out on every string group, every position on the guitar. And that's just A, right? Once you have A under your belt, guess what happens next? Then you move to another note, move to B, or C, or D, or G, or wherever you want to move to. But this is definitely a hard, concept, or a hard lesson to tackle. But the benefit is massive. Like, it's going to open up your whole musical world, I promise you. But the first thing you have to do is practice. You have to think, kind of open up your mind, and open up that fretboard. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with Music Only Has 12 Notes. And I realize this concept in this lesson is kind of heavy. Some of you out there might be scratching your head thinking, dude, what was all that? While other viewers out there might have this under your belt and you're ready for the next, installment or the next lesson. But this is really important. It's one of those things you really have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, do I know this or do I not know this? And if you know it, that's awesome. Move on to the next thing. If you don't know it, or you're kind of struggling with it, then that's showing you this is something you really need to attack and approach and work on. And it's one of those things, like once you kind of have it, under your belt and mastered, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to work on it again. You have it. But it's a process. It's going to take some time. You have to think, you have to kind of memorize and remember things. And I know that's hard for certain people out there. But don't be afraid to challenge yourself and really boost your ability and knowledge of music. Kind of understanding, chords and scales and modes and these formulas and stuff. It's very, very important. It's a process. It's going to take some time. But everything I shared in this episode should help, or at least shed some light as far as, tapping into some of this and really unveiling and revealing what all this stuff is. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to the lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.